Hello, Internet. Welcome back to Driving and Dragons. I'm Daniel, and we're going to talk some more about religion in your TTRPG setting. Now, this is kind of a little bit of an addendum to our world building series on religion. There is more detail to come on this sort of thing, but one thing I did want to touch on is some quick and easy ways to, just as a general overview, establish how you're going to develop a pantheon or develop the gods themselves or the cosmic forces for your tabletop role playing game setting. On the 280ZX, doing a little work there, I am replacing the ignition relay. Once again, trying to fix that ignition issue that I've been having. I've also got some work I'm going to do on the throttle body and on the mass airflow sensors and air control modules, just making sure that we've got fuel, that we've got air, and we've got spark. Spoiler alert, I've got air and fuel, but I don't have spark, and that's what's keeping me from cranking up the car and being able to move on to the brakes and tires and wheels and doing some of the body work and really getting this car back on the road. It's pretty frustrating, but that's just what goes with the territory when you're working on these older vehicles and when you're doing restoration work. Sometimes you end up having to chase down some of these electrical gremlins and stuff like that. I'm really hoping that I'm not going to be pulling out a ohm meter or voltometer and trying to chase down a short, just because that's really a pain in the butt. Luckily, there's not a tremendous amount of wire that goes into that. It's just wires that run from the ignition coil back to the relay, from the relay to through the fuses to the battery. And that's basically about it when it comes to the wiring for the ignition system. So we're going to get working on that, and hopefully we can fix these ignition issues, get that car back on the road. Got to start off here with credit where credit's due, and that goes to Miss Harmony Ginger. I was starting to put together some of the bits and pieces of the 201 series, the 200 series classes that I'm doing on our world building university, where we're going to do a series specifically on developing religions and building them for your setting. And Harmony is running a Bronstein style AD&D game. So this is very Bro SR, Blackmore, old school wargaming, fog of war style play, which is not my preferred method of play, nor is it a preferred way that I like to run games. But it does have a lot of really cool merits to it, and it really gave me this great idea. She is running a Godstein game, as she calls it. And basically what this is she's running a Bronstein where each one of the players is also responsible for running one of the gods in the world. I'm going to go ahead and give a quick breakdown that she gave me of how her Godstein works, just so that people who are interested can get the background. We're not using all of that. I basically picked an idea to add to a few different ways to generate pantheons, especially in games where it's really important that you have divine influence. When I thought about her Godstein game, I was like, that's a really cool idea for world building and a great way to get your players invested in the world. So here's what she's doing. She had each player create a god based on random parameters. They control them in the Bronstein game that created the world. And now they have a world in conflict. The campaign is run in 1-to-1 time, with one god doing a major action every month. The god is allowed to take an action. It's voted on by every god on the council, and there's 12, one for each player, in a secret voting process. The gods also have a currency called mana that they can exchange freely with each other, spend to give players cheap experience, a blessing, or do other various things in the world itself. And they can even spend it secretly to gain another vote on their council, and use it for bribes and secret deals and that sort of thing. If you understand how a Bronstein works, they maintain a very heavy fog of war, so there's a lot of interaction with the game master to make sure that player 1 does not know something that player 2 does if they're not right there to observe it. Just like real life, you don't know what I'm doing when I'm not recording. Also, while that's going on, they have a player campaign that is running. They have 3 groups that meet and overlap and do the typical Bronstein thing. But the cool part to me is that the players are what are running the gods. And I figured, a quick way. Now, I wouldn't run this as a full session. I wouldn't run this as a Bronstein. But what I would do is if I'm going to create a world, particularly if I'm going to create a world where I'm concerned about the setting in terms of what's going on in the quote unquote real world with mortals, what's happening between nations. I'm more concerned about a certain cultural identity. I'm more concerned about mortal level behavior and that sort of thing. I'm not super concerned about the gods themselves as a part of the story. You could use kind of a miniature version of what she's doing to generate the gods for your world. You take all the things you need for gameplay. We'll use Dungeons and Dragons as an example here. Let's say you have all the domains that you need for your clerics, and you have the major philosophies and major things that have to be covered by the gods: good, evil, law, chaos, fire, water, earth, air, light, dark, positive energy, negative energy, the big things that really have to be covered, as well as those domains and portfolios that have to be taken care of for a Dungeons and Dragons game to work. You don't feel like generating all this. You don't want to just do a quick palette swap. Spoiler alert, that's coming up here in a minute. What's a cool, fun way to get your players invested in the world, to add some narrative depth, to get some additional creativity, and to take a workload off of the GM? Well, here's what you do. You get your players together. Maybe it's your session 0. You've already got a big chunk of your world kind of worked out, and you say, hey, guys, here's what we're going to do. I want you guys to be involved in the creation of our setting. So I got some stuff in a hat here. Maybe it's just use random generator, whatever it is. I'm going to randomly assign a few portfolios or a few domains to every single player, and I'm going to randomly assign an alignment to each character, to each player, and it's just to make sure I get my coverage, that I get my good, I get my evil, get my law, get my chaos, etc., etc. I'm going to assign these things out randomly to the players, and each one of these players is going to get to make a god, or is going to get to make a couple of gods and make their own stories. Because normally we're not going to have 10 or 12 players in our games. We're going to have 4 or 5 in most standard TTRPG games. Well, if you got 5 players, each one of them can make 2 to 3 gods with 2 to 3 sets of portfolios, 2 to 3 sets of different criteria to them and domains. You're going to get some of that backstory out. So you got that character who loves to give you the 40-page backstories. Give him 3 gods that he needs to write for, and now you're going to get a character and 3 gods with good, manageable backstories, as opposed to one character with a novel-length backstory that you got to edit all over the place. It's also going to add some investment to the world. Each player is bringing their gods together into your campaign, bringing their different deities with their different stories, their different myths, their different legends, and their different outlooks. And now they're invested. They want to see that kind of thing. They want to see the religions in the world. They want to see the different things that are cool for them. And if you have that religious ceremony that's happening in a town, where a lot of times many parties would be like, you know what, cool, whatever, window dressing. I don't really care about the Paylor temple or whatever. You might have that one cleric who's like, well, I need to kind of somewhat participate, and kind of throws a little bit of just a little perfunctory lip service towards whatever you've put together, but they're in town to do their shopping or whatever and get back to the next adventure and talk to whoever's going to give them the gold or the XP or whatever. But if you have players who've all created these deities, who've kind of come up with these ideas, and you bring that idea to life for them, and you got a festival in town, well, now you're going to have at least one player who's like, no, we got to take care of part of this. This is really cool. They're excited because you're bringing their idea to life. This brings them more investment, gets them deeper into the world. It's going to also help with some of your murder hobo type nonsense, where people are just disrupting the world because they like to, because they treat it like a video game. They don't really care. They're going to take it a lot more personally when the world's getting disrupted and it's the festival of the god they created, or it has something to do with this religious order that they put forth as part of the legend to one of the deities that they created. So it can kind of help in that that regard too. So that's the Godstein development method. It's not a Godstein game like Harmony's running, but the birth of the idea came from her Godstein game. We're going to sit down, and as I'm putting this world together, every player, here you go. Backstory away. Come up with some cool ideas. Give me your little piece to be part of this world. And me as a game master who, at this point, isn't super invested in a great mythology or anything, that's not really what I'm looking to do with my setting. I've just taken a massive part of my world building off my shoulders and handed it to my players. I personally think that's a pretty cool idea. You can let me know, let me know down below if I screwed up or if I've got something that I missed that you think is going to cause it to backfire that I just overlooked. So a couple other quick ways to knock out your gods for a world that's, particularly if you're not super focused on religion itself. One is informed by culture. If you have certain cultural beats that you really have in your world that are important to what you're doing, and that's how you decided to develop your campaign setting. For instance, you're doing like a very Rokugan for the Oriental Adventures in 3rd edition, which was based off of the Legend of the Seven Rings, I think is what it's called. You're kind of a Japanese flair there. Go look up your Japanese cultural development, your spirit, Shintoism and some of the spirit worship, that sort of thing. Let it inform your religion and kind of tweak what you need for your game setting there. So you're going to be informed by your culture. If you have a culture that mirrors anything real world, take a look at the religions that developed from and around those cultures. Same deal. If you have a culture that holds something in particularly high regard, it should probably be reflected in their religion. If you have a culture that is heavily dependent on a certain natural feature, you should probably let that inform your religion. Real world example, the Egyptians lived and died literally by the consistent flooding of the Nile River. So all of their religious structures were rife and run through with those death and renewal, rebirth, cyclical themes that came from the Nile consistently flooding on a regular basis and being the basis for their life. So culture informs the religion. You can do that pretty easy. You've started putting in these cultures that are very important to what you're doing narratively. Look at your culture and say, what would be the things that are super important to these people? How do I tie them into the gods? And then how do I hook whatever portfolios, domains, whatever I need to them? The next thing is straight domain. I don't particularly like straight domain because it is a lot more work than you think it is, but this is where you take a list of the domains, portfolios, just the broad concepts that you need gods for. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's going to be your alignments, it's going to be your elements, it's going to be your different outsider types, and then you're going to add a god for each one of them and making kind of a personification of whatever that is. Magic god is basically a super powerful wizard. Nature god is essentially a super powerful druid, etc., etc. They're just really the exemplars of whatever they are. I'm not a big fan of straight domain because it really feels tacked on. It really feels like just a gameplay mechanic. Again, we're looking at if the religion is not a super important part of the setting you're developing. You have the naturalist method. The naturalist method is, once again, what we're going to do is we're going to take certain natural phenomena and we're going to tie our religions back to them and for the different cultures in the world, instead of it being based largely on their culture in terms of day-to-day life and that sort of thing. Is going to be more based on the environment around them. You're going to have your fire and sun deities and stuff in your desert areas. You're going to have your ice and water and wind and whatnot deities in your cold mountains, and you're going to have your animal deities and whatnot in your forests. You're basically going to say, what's the climate around this particular nation or culture? And then you're going to pull in stuff from that and say, these are what my gods are around it because they're the natural world around the people. You have the last two are going to be my least favorite, but they work, and they especially work if really you don't want to focus on things like outsiders and cosmic battles, and especially if you want really hands off deities. Two easy things you can do are either gameplay informed or reskin. Reskin is real simple. Whatever system you're playing, find out what the religion is there already, plug and play. Or take another system, plug and play. Grab those default D&D gods, give them a new coat of paint, change the name, adjust them a little bit, throw them in the game, tell your players, hey, this is basically Cord, but he's a little different in this way. But his domains and his powers and the stuff he grants his clerics, basically Cord. I'm not a big fan of the reskin in a lot of ways. It's a great shorthand. It really reduces the workload. It's very easy for the players to understand when they're making their characters in a game where that really matters for like your cleric and your paladin and whatnot. But it is going to be a little immersion breaking, just so you know, because here's the simple, dirty fact. If you don't care about something, neither will your players. And nothing says I really don't care about my gods. Like I just reskinned the Player's Handbook gods, or I just made these gods based on gameplay, which is the last method, gameplay informed, that is literally just I need to make sure I have stuff for these players because these players have decided to play religious characters. I need him for this NPC so that he has these kind of domains and stuff. I just need to have answers to these questions. So I'm going to go very strictly based off of gameplay, and I'm going to say this is the gods. This is the least flavor, least meaningful way to do it. There is one way this can work in a more narrative setting, and that is actually in the true reverse of that Godstein example. This is where, hey, here's these gods and here's what they are. But I'm going to let my players decide how they're worshipped. I'm going to let my players decide what matters to them and how they work and how they operate and what their rituals are. So basically, the only gods that are really going to be fleshed out are going to be the deities of your characters and the deities that are directly opposed to them as they bring them up and say, oh, that's a cleric of so and so. We really hate them. I'm looking for this god's holy symbol because we don't get along because of such and such story. That can bring the players in to actually help develop the characteristics and develop the culture and the lore, so to speak. But it's really chaotic, and it's going to take a special kind of player who really jumps into their character for them to care about something that you kind of send the signals that you don't. One last thing, and this is something you got to do regardless of your pantheon and regardless of your development method, especially if you're going to go kind of fast and easy, especially if you're going to involve the gods in your game, and especially if you want to have your players have a hand in it. If you're going to do the whole Harmony Ginger derived, players are creating the pantheon for you, players are creating the mythology for you, they're going to need to know this. And that is divinity innate, or is divinity earned, or is it a mix in your world? Are gods gods because they were born gods or developed gods, or they always existed? Are they like God the Holy Father, who is forever and ever? He's the unmoved mover, the uncreated creator. He is the uncaused cause, and he always was, always will be, and existed before the universe, and is forever and ever and everything and everything. And being a god is just part of being the universe. Or did divinity get earned? Was it a great hero who achieved a great level of power? Is it achieved by having a certain number of mortal worshippers as well as a certain amount of power? Does it have to do with being tied to the cosmos in some way? Or is it a mix? Were there primordial gods who created everything but were later replaced because if you kill the great god of evil, you become the next god of evil? Or if you become more heavily worshipped than one particular god in an area, you replace him? Or can you attain divinity some other way? Can it be gifted by a greater deity? These questions have to be answered before you can kind of hand off that responsibility to somebody else, because newsflash, your players are going to ask. or even worse, they're not going to ask, and you're going to have radical differences between the two, and you're going to have great incongruencies because this guy over here is saying, well, these gods were all developed from being, regular people who achieved great heroic success or whatever and earned their divinity, while this guy over here is talking about how all gods were part of the foundations of creation, and that's a core part of his deity's myths. You need to have those answers. Just a quick breakdown, some of these quick and dirty ways that you can pull together gods, especially if they're not going to be a tremendous part of your story building and world building on your own. You've got the Godstein Harmony Ginger derived creation method that inspired this video in the first place. You've got informed by culture, so the culture of the people that you're developing comes first and the gods come second. You have the straight domain and the reskin and the gameplay informed, which all kind of circle around the same idea of looking at your game mechanics and finding easy ways to make sure that your bases are covered. And then you have your naturalist method where you basically take a look at the the climate and the environment around your different nations and cultures and peoples in the world, and that's what informs the religion. So that's what I've got for right now. Let me know what you think below. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.